Hey everyone, we have another audiobook for you. This is The System of Communist Representation from Amadeo Bordiga in May of 1919, written in May of 1919, published in Il Soviet on the 13th September 1919. This is being recorded by the Solar Collective for Library of the Communist Left in 2025. A brief note. Although this text can be found on Marxists.org, I do not recommend their translation. You can find a much better translation on the Solar Collective website, linked in the description below. If anyone can get in touch with Marxists.org so they can replace their faulty translation with the much better one found on our website, please let me know. Without any further delay, let's get on with the reading of The System of Communist Representation. In launching our communist program, which contained in synthesis the answer to many vital problems affecting the revolutionary movement of the proletariat, we expected to see a wide-ranging discussion on all its points. Instead, only the incompatibility of electoral participation in the soberly stated program was and is fiercely debated. The electoralist maximalists, while claiming that electoral action is secondary for them, are so concerned about it that they have spilled avalanches of articles against the few anti-electoralist lines in our program. As for us, apart from the extensive treatment given to these columns, to the reasons for abstentionism, we have only now begun to respond in the Avanti to defend ourselves from the deluge of electoralist objections. We are therefore pleased to note that Le Nuovo of Turin asks for explanations of that point in the Communist program, which says, quote, "Elections will be called for local workers' councils regardless of the professional categories to which they belong, and divided by city and provincial districts," end quote. The columnist, who is Comrade Andrea Viglongo, wonders if this was a way of denying that the power of the Soviets must come from the masses consulted and voting in the very place where they work, in factories, workshops, mines, villages. Footnote 1. Viglongo, towards new institutions, in number 16 of the 30th August 1919 of the Ordine Nuovo. Apologies for all of my Italian pronunciation, I cannot speak Italian. The thinking of the program's drafters was this: the Soviet system is a political representation of the working class, the fundamental characteristic of which is the exclusion from the right to vote of all those who do not belong to the proletariat. It was believed that the Soviet was the same thing as the economic trade union. Nothing could be more inaccurate. It may be that in the first revolutionary moments, Soviet bodies were set up in various countries with representatives of trade organizations, but this was only a temporary stopgap. Whereas the economic trade union has its objective the defense of class interests of the worker insofar as he belongs to a given trade or industry, in the Soviet, the proletarian is represented by a member of a social class that conquers and exercises political power and the direction of society insofar as its interests are common to all workers of all trades. In the Central Soviet, we have a political representation of the working class with deputies from local constituencies. There are no national representatives of the various occupational categories in it at all. This is as much to refute the syndicalist interpretations as it is to refute the reformist parody of hypothetical occupational constituencies touted as institutions with anything Soviet-like about them. But in local city or rural village Soviets, how should the machinery of representation be constituted? If we refer to the Russian system, set out in chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14 of the Constitution of the Republic of Soviets, we can conclude that the essential thing is that in the cities there is one delegate for every 1,000 inhabitants, in the countryside for every 100, and the elections take place, Article 66, according to the customs established by the local Soviets. So we do not have that the number of delegates to be elected depends on the number of factories or work units, and we do not know whether the election is done by grouping the electors to whom a representative is to be elected and by what criterion. But if we refer to the programs of communists in other countries, we can conclude that the nature of the electoral unity, while lending itself to very important considerations, is not the substantive problem of the Sovietist order. The gearing of the Soviets undoubtedly has a dual nature: political, revolutionary on the one hand, and economic, constructive on the other. In the first moments, the first function is predominant, which with the unfolding of the bourgeois expropriation gradually gives way to the second. For this second function, the technically suitable organisms will later be refined in the school of necessity, and in this field the forms of delegation of the unionized categories and of the production units will arise and intertwine, especially with regard to the technique and discipline of labor. But the fundamental political function of the network of workers' councils is based on the historical concept of dictatorship. Proletarian interests must have free play insofar as they invest the entire class above the categories in the entire historical development of its emancipation movement. The conditions for this are basically the exclusion of the bourgeoisie from all participation in political activity and the appropriate distribution of the electorate in the local constituencies from which the delegations to the Congress of Soviets, which appoints the Central Executive Committee, and which has the task of promulgating the decisions for the subsequent socialization of the various branches of the economy. It seems that, in the face of this historical definition of the communist representative system, Nuovo slightly exaggerates the formal definition of the machinery of these representations. Where and with what gearing the voting takes place is not a substantive problem. It can involve disparate national and regional solutions. Only up to a certain point can we see the germ of the Soviets in the internal factory commissions, or rather we think that these are destined to germinate the factory councils in charge of technical and disciplinary attributions during and after the socialization of the factory itself, it being clear that the city political soviet can be elected where it will be most convenient, and probably in meetings not very different from the present electoral lists. Note, that is electoral lists, two separate words, not electoralists, just for the sake of clarity. Moving on. The electoral lists themselves will have to be very different. Viglongo raises the question as to whether all the workers in the factory will vote or only the organized ones. We make him think that some workers, even organized ones, may be excluded from the electoral lists of the city political soviet if it turns out, in addition to working in the factory, they live off the proceeds of a small amount of pecuniary or land capital. This case is not uncommon among us. The Russian Constitution itself clearly provides for it in the first paragraph of Article 55. Legitimate unemployed and unfit for work must also vote. What characterizes the communist system is thus the definition of the right to be a voter, which does not depend on belonging to a professional category, but on whether or not the individual, in the integral complex of his social relations, is a proletarian interested in the rapid realization of communism, or a non-proletarian nevertheless bound to the preservation of the economic relations of private property. This very simple condition guarantees the political functionality of the Sovietist representation. New and agile technical economic organs will multiply alongside it, subordinated, however, always to what the former will establish regarding the broad outlines of the measures that will be implemented, because only pure political representation will summarize the collective interests of the proletariat until the abolition of the classes has been totally realized, acting as the maximum accelerator of the revolutionary process. At a later date, we will address the question of whether it is possible and expedient to constitute the political Soviets even before the revolutionary battle for the conquest of power. And that, right there, is the end of the article. I would once again like to reiterate the fact that the Marxists.org translation is unreadable, and if any of you have contacts within Marxist.org, we would be more than happy to provide a translation which is more accurate and meets the basic requirements of being able to be read coherently. If you would like to contribute a audiobook to this project, send me an MP3. My link, my Discord is linked in the, well, not linked, listed in the description. You can hit me up on there. Make sure that you cut out any mistakes. I'll go through the audio and I'll pretty it up. If it's up to our standards, we'll put it on the show. Yeah, that's all. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binaries, bye-bye. Have a good one.